So what we're going to try to do tonight is same sort of thing we did last summer in San Jose. We tried to get a spattering of experts from the field of very differing lines of thought and experience. And our goal here tonight is sort of get them in a room. If you were here in the opening session, I was talking about this Slido that we have set up here. So this is a Q&A thing. All of you can go to this directly right now. So pull out your cell phones, go to sli.do. It's the URL. It will bring you to this Q&A thing. You can ask a question. You can put a name. You can put somebody else's name. I really don't care. You can just put anonymous. It doesn't matter.
What's the Slido code?
The Slido code is SAA. So put that in there. That will bring you right to this. So essentially what we're going to do is I'm going to have everyone give a brief introduction about themselves, and then we'll sort of open up the field. If you see questions on here, give them a thumbs up. If you see a question that's crappy, give it a thumbs down. If you have one of your own to add, please do so. If you don't ask questions, I'm going to heckle you individually and make you ask questions on the spot. Deal? Cool. Okay. Ed, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Ed Coleman. I'm an Accumulo contributor.
Hi, I'm Gaurav Kanade. I'm with Microsoft. I work on the HD Insight HBase team as a software engineer.
Hi, my name is Thomas De Silva. I'm an engineer at Salesforce on the big data team, and I've been working on Phoenix for the past 4 years. Worked on a few different areas in Phoenix, like functional indexing and scaling the metadata layer.
I'm Jesse Yates. I'm a Phoenix PMC, HBase committer. Day job, I'm at Tesla. Before that, big data startup and Salesforce and Booz Allen. So all over the place.
So let's get this started. How about we start with one that Jesse didn't give us? So here's a good question from Oliver. What is the current best practice for multi-tenancy in HBase? For example, a big company has one big cluster and hundreds of groups want to use HBase for different use cases. Thomas, how does Salesforce approach the problem of multi-tenancy? Like, what are some of the types of problems that you have seen in terms of like rolling out even just a generalized distributed system, a single sort of monolithic cluster that can scale out to multiple orgs?
So for the longest time, we were in 098, and we had a lot of issues where one use case affected the entire system. So we had issues with secondary indexing. We have a use case that uses mutable global indexes, and there are some issues that we've had to deal with that. Longer term, we've been trying. So we finally upgraded to 1.3, and long term we are trying to get region server groups and those kinds of features where we can isolate use cases. And I think for the long term, eventually once we go to public cloud, I think the thinking is we'll have clusters segmented by use cases. So we still have a lot of customers on a single individual cluster, but that cluster is use case specific. So we don't have use cases stepping over each other. And that's our plan, basically.
You can see that go the other way too, where all of a sudden you have 100 different clusters to manage, and that doesn't scale ops-wise. So you have to sort of play that balance. Can we have one big cluster that manages a large number of our use cases, and then really find the ones that have the really special requirements that can't use region groups, that can't use all the other shared resources, that really need their own cluster. But that's really one of the discussions where it's like, you're really sure, because this is really going to suck to have to manage another cluster. So if you can avoid it, avoid it.
Ed, do you have anything to add on that one?
For Accumulo, I don't know if it's such a problem because you can manage it just by giving everybody their own tables. And then people can bulk ingest to their own tables and query those own tables and set authorizations that way. So it doesn't have the regional server limitation.
So it's more of an issue that you have a lot more people maybe going through bulk loading as an ingest path as opposed to like live data flowing into it and going through the mem store.
It is, but you could set up a managed service to do that, and then much like the PQS that was just presented, is to have a query interface in front of Accumulo so that people don't even necessarily know that the Accumulo is on the back end.
Okay. about this one? What are some of the missing features in the Spark HBase connectors module that the community may want? Jesse, you want to drive that one? You're gonna be my go-to guy.
Wow, that's a tough one. And that I don't actually use Spark HBase connector. I don't recommend actually doing any sort of big bulk reads on HBase because you're going to ruin your access patterns. You're going to thrash your OS caches. It's basically bad for every user but the ones doing massive reads from your cluster. So don't. It's not that bad.
So maybe that's here, first poll the audience here. Who in the audience uses the Spark HBase connector today? Okay, a few. Okay. Does anyone use what was the old Hortonworks one called? The Hortonworks Spark Connect SHC, the Spark Hortonworks connector or Spark HBase connector? That's the one. Anyone use that? Thank you, Clay. You use everything. So anything from the audience, users of that you see missing or anything, something like that along those lines? You liar.
Some interesting features that at Bloomberg we love from the FHC are the multi-HBase systems, because we don't do big pull reads through HBase, but it's very useful for being able to do small analytical work. And if one cluster goes down, it's really nice to be able to fall over to another cluster.
I should check. Could everyone actually hear him speak?
No. Nope.
So, let me see if I can paraphrase that before I drink too much. It's a really nice case to do small targeted workloads with it.
If you want, I can just do this.
That's even better.
Spark HBase connector has a feature for being able to talk to multiple HBase clusters. So it's really nice for our use case where we do small analytical queries on top of HBase. Should one cluster go down, we can immediately fail over to another cluster thanks to Spark HBase connector. And it's really difficult sometimes to talk to multiple HBase clusters from one client code base.
So how about Garb? What do you think about this? What role does SQL continue to play in the NoSQL database landscape? How do you see users of HDI that you interact with? How important to them is SQL on top of this and a managed HBase offering?
Yeah, so we do see on HDI a lot of customers do want to use Phoenix on top of HBase. Very few customers are advanced or go hardcore HBase. A lot of the customers do want the simplicity of Phoenix just to make it easy for them to query and so on. So yeah, I think a lot of the newer people who are not that HBase, they do prefer the SQL-like syntax, and it's a challenge for us to optimize for that and cater to debugging issues related to that on top of HBase, for which we try to optimize and set up our debugging systems.
So you think SQL as a query access layer is the most important thing?
Uh,
Or you
from
think there's other things that Phoenix specifically could provide that people like?
from my observation, yes, SQL as an access layer, and our customers seem to prefer.
Moderator's choice here. So let me flip that one on its head. Guys who have done a lot of working at Salesforce in the past or currently, do you have use cases in which you do use Phoenix and you specifically, or you use HBase and specifically choose not to use Phoenix?
So at Salesforce, we build a lot of service protection into Phoenix, and we kind of push everybody to use Phoenix. But now there are people who just want to use it HBase as a plain key value store, and they don't really care about having a SQL layer. They have a very simple use case, and they don't want to they don't want to use Phoenix because there's some overhead in compiling the query and all of that. And we so we are kind of exploring allowing people to directly use the HBase client API rather than going by Phoenix.
So I'm going to follow up on that. So I don't know if you guys went to the Tesla talk earlier with Data Tank that we've built there. We have a very SQL-like interface. It has filters, it has ands, but it's not SQL, and people really wish it was in a lot of cases. And so what I would love to see, and we talked about this at a Phoenix meetup recently, is pulling out some of the core components of Phoenix, like a type system, like some of the row key constructors, some of the push-down work that we would have loved to have used 4 years ago, but just didn't have available at the time. That really builds this really great onboard ramp for Phoenix to be adopted, or at least just to lower the barrier to entry for HBase and some of these other key value stores. Because you could reuse this really anywhere. It's just a generic type system on bytes. So it's, SQL's not going away. Let's just make it easier to use it everywhere.
Yeah, there were some discussions about this on the dev thread, and should really explore that. Basically, move the type system to its own repo, so then it can be used independently of depending on Phoenix. So yeah.
There was a good discussion, adding some more of that from, I think it was the HBaseCon China end of last year, maybe, where there was a lot of groups that came out of. So China is, for those who don't know, are this really rapidly developing HBase user group. As in, I would guess that they've probably overtaken US in terms of developers who are actually contributing stuff back to HBase, or they're very close to doing so, if not already. So that was one of the things that they came up with, is they were not quite trying to build a full-fledged SQL system as something like a Phoenix would provide, but they were building these sort of very hybrid Mach-E systems, sort of what Jesse was describing there, where you can build some pretty basic things that give you scans and predicate pushdowns, and basic things to make a developer's life a little bit easier, but not have to bite the bullet of saying, I'm implementing a full SQL specification.
The other one, isn't there a trade-off, though, between what latency you're willing to take versus complexity? Because there's a lot you can leverage in MapReduce and then simplify that data model, then store it for easier query. So rather than having complicated queries, you offload that to the MapReduce side where it actually can be more efficient, but sometimes it's a little bit slower.
For sure. You're going to jump in there?
I would just agree. Or a lot of bit slower depending on your query.
All right. Since this is quite a room full of distributed system nerds, in the most loving sense of the word, what's your best trick that you've learned over the years in terms of something you found man, that just saved my bacon. I would have spent another week trying to find this bug, fix this bug. Any tools, tips, tricks, specific to Java Hadoop stuff, generic, just an OS level, and how try to throw this one down the line, see if we can get an answer from everybody.
Do you mean something more complicated than PSSH and grep?
USSH is a great answer.
I mean, regular expressions in grep are really a long, that's data science.
I'm honestly still looking to find that one best debugging tip or trick, but yeah, it's very challenging, especially with customers who are. A lot of our customers are trying out these technologies for the first time, so we have to start from isolating whether there's some bottleneck in their client side, first of all, and they expect Microsoft HDI HBase to be more of as managed as possible. So it's just in addition to all of the typical tools you mentioned. Yeah, just up until recently, we didn't have it's a constant process. We are just trying to expose as many metrics as possible. I don't have one single answer for.
So for Phoenix, so we have this tool called FERF that we kind of use to simulate what we do in production, and then we have a bunch of scenarios that we run. But it's tough for some of these bugs that we found in production. It's it's the way we run it in our environment. We have an old client and a new server sitting there for months on end, for at least 2 months, and then you only see a bug in that scenario, and only when a query runs for longer than 4 hours, query keeps running for longer than 4 hours. So it's really hard to debug some of these things. It's just, you need to look at the specific issue and then get a get a log dump and stuff like that. So yeah.
Yeah, I've been there. So I would also recommend not being afraid of strace and LSOF, especially on some distributed systems. You're going to make connections with their servers, and they're going to get weird and wonky. So just be willing to dig into that, and just give yourself time. Like some of these things just like take a couple weeks to really dig into. Obviously, like you can need to fix the issue at the current time, but don't be afraid of root cause because they'll probably lead you to end up patching some of the open source projects, which means how do you manage forks or light forks as we used to run in Salesforce, because if you don't have it, it's going to break you in the future.
Okay, for those who are here at Dice and Toshi's talk earlier, I really like Dice included a link to a Brendan Gregg slide or talk that he had given about what was the acronym use. And so trying to do a top-down approach there. So really, I think that's Jesse kind of spoke to me there. Trying to Thomas as well. Finding it's not necessarily like listening and say, this is the problem report that I got in here, but it's often a lot of times you have to sit down and be like, oh, well, this is what you said the problem was, but this is what we think the actual problem is, and that just gives you a starting point. You just kind of trickle down and start looking and trying to find something. So let's use one from a name here I actually don't recognize, so from Sumbit, thank you. Customers have expectations of being able to lift and shift on-prem workloads to the cloud. Even after trying to closely match cluster shape and size, there's a set of parameter tuning which is inherently different when it comes to optimizing performance in the cloud. How do you approach this problem? Maybe I will give this one to Garb, since I know you have solved this problem in the past.
I think I planted that question on behalf of Sambit, so I could do it somehow. But yeah, it's one of the biggest challenges we are facing with our customers right now. And yeah, they just have their applications ready. Sometimes it's even several versions older, and they just expect that I just change my cluster to point to here and it should start working right away. And it's not easy. So with some of the customers, we actually went for months just trying to map out how their on-prem VM configs would map appropriately to the correct Azure VM shapes, had them run several load tests and so on. So it's a process of weeks, and the expectation is that it should work within a day or so. And I'm looking forward to hearing if anyone else has better ideas or thoughts.
Okay, I planted a similar question earlier too. With the exclusion of actually Microsoft's talk this morning, I would actually said moving lift and shift HBase on-prem to the cloud was a fool's errand. You're never going to get one-to-one cost parity, or at least 2, 3, 4, 5 x in cost. Plus, you have the unknown unknowns of what if my VM goes down? What if the network is crappy that you don't have on-prem? So it's really challenging, I thought, in that case. But if you look at, okay, we have different disks available, we have different configurations that you wouldn't have on premise, now it starts to get a little more interesting, and actually you can probably get closer operational improvements. But these databases, at least, they're generally fixed size. You generally know where your growth is going to be. It's not like you need to have 2, 3, 4x the capacity all of a sudden, right? So it's not this like Wild West, I need 1,000 nodes right now. Now I don't need them anymore at all. So it's not as useful, I thought, for that case. But you can do it, and I think you can do it in really interesting ways. So I'm excited to see that from Azure. That's really cool. I think Google has probably some similar stuff. So like, there's ways you can do it, but it's not going to be easy by any means. Yeah.
Well, I mean, right now, Accumulo, a lot of its testing and development is done on the cloud. It's just we use dedicated nodes. Where we're not good at right yet is using S3 for other storage, and it really boils down to the write-ahead logs. And Accumulo will scale by adding or removing tablet servers. But again, it wouldn't be something that I would do, in the blink of an eye. So you could scale out that way if that's the way that you wanted to go.
And then I would poll the audience. Has anyone done a lift and shift of some on-prem workload to a cloud-based deployment? Ooh. Ish? Yeah?
Dedicated nodes, and performance was typically not the key criteria.
Okay, so repeating that, it was successful on Amazon, but it was using dedicated nodes, but performance was not a key criteria for doing that sort of lift and shift. So, Mr. Clady, what do you think of on-demand clusters? AWS read replica clusters, so he's referring to the HBase feature there where we have where we would have some region servers that are open, hosting data for read only, not accepting writes, so you avoid that, sort of sidestep that problem. Or an HBase on demand on Kubernetes where you can sort of scale up dynamically based on some like metrics-based criteria. What do you guys think of, one of you want to take that?
If no one will. Okay, I love it. Do it. That's one of the beautiful things. You could actually even store like H files in an S3 equivalent, right? And then that's actually where your queries are even from your offline source. So you could run a Presto on H files. And now all your pipelines end up just generating H files, which you can then read from HBase. If you need point lookups or you need bigger queries, you use Presto or a Hive. So yeah, it's a super awesome approach. People don't do it nearly enough. But if it only fits your use case, then.
So I think I want to ask a question here. I'm trying to figure out the right way to ask it. I found, so Alex's talk on data tank at Tesla was very interesting to me that there was a very clear decision made there where if you had a query that was going to touch a large amount of data in the table, it was just strictly designed by architecture that was disallowed by the system, and the solution was to go to a separate system. So I'm curious what you guys think in terms of a big table-like system, so both applicable to like HBase, Accumulo, or Phoenix. Should we be trying to prioritize a workload where we are doing very read-heavy, non-short latency reads? So something where we have to scan either a large portion of the table, either returning large swaths of data, or doing large filters, or is that better served by some external system? Maybe we'll start up here with Jesse, since I think he has a short answer.
Yes and no, actually, not as short as you'd like. It's great for Tesla. It makes operations super easy in terms of managing our users. There are plenty of users, though, who do want to scan a large swath of things. So they end up running these big-ass scripts that that would literally run over tons of device IDs and just one by one loops through until they hit their quota, and they wait a little bit, and they go some more. So there's definitely a middle ground to play there. And if we could do some more, if we could upgrade our HBase version, we're stuck a little bit in the past, so we could do read replicas, then read replicas and bigger batch reads start to make a lot more sense to me. But even so, even in the offline systems, we'd still want to do things like in Presto and have some guards in there to make sure you still aren't reading 14 years worth of data. That's just bad too.
So for us, so we do have a lot of small point lookups, but then sometimes some users do run like large scans, and so one of the things we wanted to do is try to figure out how to efficiently round robin between these users who are running large scans and the small point lookups, but it's a little hard right now so HBase doesn't know you have 10 or you have a large number of scans that are the result of a single user query, right? So I think there's some Jiras that filed about making that simpler or adding some functionality to HBase so that HBase knows these groups of scans are from a single query, so it could maybe potentially round robin between them, so you don't have small scans that are starving behind a user running a large scan. So maybe there's some work that we can do with that. So we have this feature in Phoenix called stats where you can parallelize queries within a region. And one of the reasons we couldn't really use that at Salesforce is we don't have a way of knowing all of these scans come from a single user. So maybe if there's some future work that we could do with that, leveraging that feature.
So one of the features that's about to be released in Accumulo 2.0 is there's scan executors that actually allow you to set priorities on scans and to have scans yield, so that longer running scans can pause for shorter running scans, and it actually does dramatically improve benchmarks, especially for like the fluo use case is where it kind of came out of. But you're always going to have that tension where if you're trying to satisfy quality of service for something that has short-term, really high value, you're using it for real-time control or decision-making, and you have somebody that just wants to ask a what-if question, that they could wait a little bit longer for that answer, there's still going to be that trade-off of what you allow through the system at one time.
For those who don't know, Percolator, or Fluo is an incubator project still?
It might have graduated.
Okay, so a Fluo is a Apache maybe incubator project, which is a implementation of the Percolator paper on top of Accumulo. So that's a pretty neat project if you have any interest in that.
Before you go on, one of the dreams I've always had is to do a layer on top of HBase and offline storage, which would then solve a lot of these problems, because you say submit MySQL query, and this is why the Phoenix Presto adapter is awesome, is now you can say, you can put a layer in there and actually parallelize over both, or parts of both, or just all on one, based on how bad it's going to be, and then your life is just good.
I'll take a question from Busby here at the top of the list. Should downstream users expect to run Apache releases in production? If not, what level of effort goes into maintaining a fork? I think I'll kick this one to Thomas first, but I'm curious. I don't know what Jesse runs it. I don't know what you guys run at Tessie layer.
So we just started running 1.3 HBase everywhere, and we're currently on Phoenix 4.13, and we're going to just upgrade to 4.14 soon. So we've been trying to upgrade from 0.98 to 1.3 for a really long time, and it's just, I think they did do some perf tests, and perf has, for our workloads, 1.3 perf is a little worse than 0.98, but we just decided to upgrade because it's to get all the new features, and eventually we'll work through the perf issues. So about maintaining a fork, I guess, if you're on an old version of HBase, then it's up to the user of that version to then backport patches and maintain it, or else you can't really expect the community to maintain it if nobody else is using it, I guess, right? Yeah.
So one of the things I started when I was at Salesforce was what we called light forks. And the idea is we stay pretty close to what Apache runs, and we run a couple light patches on top of that. But when there's a new release comes out, you upgrade your patches immediately, so most of them go away. Especially this helps if you have committers within the organization who can push your patches through. Obviously not everyone has that, so that becomes a little more difficult. So like at Tesla, we just actually created a patch for Kafka because there was a little bit that we needed from the latest release that hadn't been verified through vendors. But we've leaned on Confluent a lot to do a lot of the validation. We use CDH internally, and they've been pretty solid. So what I see is like vendors play a lot of role in making sure that you don't have to do a lot of the work. But if they can stay up to date on what the Apache releases are, it makes life for users much easier because they understand actually what you're deploying. You don't just have to blindly trust sort of what's going out there, despite release notes. But even so, we still need to do a lot of validation for whatever you roll out. So it's where you trust vendors, how far you trust them to go, and if they can help you be explicit and not just put all check marks everywhere, that's really great. And so know where we didn't test or where the testing falls short, so you can then go and test on your own hardware, on your own use case, exactly what your light fork looks like.
And for Accumulo, yes, but the thing is you do have to do a lot of validation, and it's tough because problems that you were used to and now work around are generally fixed, and things that you didn't know were problems then come up and raise themselves only when you get to scale, and so there can be churn, but yeah, you can stay fairly close to the latest release of Accumulo fairly reliably.
I would love to see from vendors some like easy to use tools to make that kind of validation easier. Like recently for Kafka, we're using Kafka Monitor, which is from LinkedIn, but it really helped us validate that yes, it's rock solid correct. We're not losing data even during an upgrade. But that's, I think, few and far between in terms of other Apache projects you're left to your own devices.
Well, and recently Accumulo had a fix where there was a problem where batch writes were coming in, and then if they went quiet for like a day, and then started up again, the write-ahead log underneath it got rolled away, okay? So under most production situations, you weren't actually seeing that, but something had happened and it popped up. We now have a test case for that. I mean, we run with agitation, and it's like, okay, write for a little bit, be quiet for a real long time. So hopefully it won't come back again, but it's impossible to know those edge cases, you know?
Yeah, these are really hard to track down bugs, and credit should be to go to the people, these organizations who track them down. They're freaking hard sometimes.
Yeah, and you look at this stuff, it's like, well, don't do that.
So we'll do one more here. I'm going to expand a little bit on Dice's question here. So his original question was, do we want to keep HBaseK2 in a separate repository out from HBase? For those who don't know, that's like a metadata recovery fixer tool for HBase. I don't want users to run a given version of HBaseK2 against any given version of the HBase cluster, which is easily doable. I think I'd like to expand on that a little bit farther and sort of say we've seen a pretty big shift across all three projects we have sort of represented up on stage here, where we are making a decision to push code that existed in the core repository out to sort of satellite repos that are versioned and released at their own cadence. What do you guys think about the implications on users and sort of the user experience now that they have to go to multiple places as well as like downstream packagers to go and get you back to where you are? Do you think this is a good trend, like, or do you think this is something that's potentially harmful? We'll see if we can get an answer from everybody.
Well, I'm pretty sure that the philosophy for Accumulo and what they're trying to do with 2.0 is they really want to reduce the user surface area so that they can concentrate on the core competencies and then add new features. That as long as the surface area of everything is so complicated and so wide, it's almost impossible to change anything without breaking somebody. But if you can, you know, use some version and have a really tight guaranteed API that people can count on, and then interfaces they can build out from there, is the way that we're trying to go. And so that's why things are being pushed out or spun off, is because we're guaranteeing that the core is stable, and then you can mix and match with what you need to do.
As far as the separate repository is concerned, we get the bits from Cloudera. So whatever they give us, yeah. Of course, there's a lot of certification and testing for every time they give us, both from their end and our end. So I think we are neutral on that as long as we can manage the whole process. But I do notice since we got the 2.0, we haven't had that many customer cases where we had to run the HBaseK2 in the first place. Of course, it's still early days, but it seems like it's a lot more stable. So.
Yeah, so we just moved the connectors into their own repo and the query services in its own repo. And the reason we did that is, you know, we wanted to be able to release those faster or whenever we wanted, rather than having to do a Phoenix release. It's also easier to, you know, so there are the tests. People complain like the tests take too long to run in Phoenix, and that's why they don't run the tests. So we want to make it easier for people to run tests on their own by moving, you know, components that they don't really maybe don't use that often or care about into their own repo. So people, you know, you just have the minimum set of surface area that you care about in Phoenix core, and anything else you can work on if you want, basically.
As far as HBaseK, long vision has been actually to be able to run it continuously inside HBase. That would have been beautiful, just automatically fixes holes and that sort of thing. That's not likely to be anytime soon. But I think Ed's point around Semver and a strong core is spot on. And having users read release notes and pick the right versions of small tools, I don't think is too big of a barrier. Especially if you're already at this level, you're pretty sophisticated already. We try to do good docs, and actually a core contribution place is in documentation, that makes everyone's life better significantly. It's a huge multiplier. So please contribute in documentation if that's the only way you want to contribute. It'd be huge.
Right. I think with that, we're probably going to be kicked out of the room here. I don't want to hold the event staff here, so Thank you to everyone who has come out today. I want to give a big thank you to Gene Labor here and Artem Hurwitz, wherever the heck he is. He said he was getting drunk earlier. He's not on the floor yet, so we're okay. So thank you to all of them who helped make this event happen. For those who don't know, this was sort of a pet project between Jeannie, Artem, and myself. So this is like our nights and weekends sort of thing where we get together and try to put this together for you all. So we sincerely hope that you got a lot out of this. We hope we can continue to do it in the future. Please say thank you to all the event staff who helped make this happen, all the EGs, so our wonderful sound tech, our people managing the food and drinks as well. Please tell them thank you on your way out. And we'll hopefully see you real soon.